Fans of the Horus Heresy, the Legiones Astartes, and MKIII Iron Armour. Thank you very much for joining me for a slightly different sort of video. And with the recent release of the new, preview, shall we say, of the new MKIII Iron Armour Space Marines for Age of Darkness Horus Heresy, I thought it'd be interesting to explore what this new design means and have a think about this and the previous designs, and in the format of a discussion with a friend of mine. Today we are joined by Jay from the Legion of Two channel. Hello, Jay.
How you doing, Leaky? Thanks very much for having me. Hey guys, as he said there, this is Jay here from the Legion of Two. So it's good to be with you all.
Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a bit about, maybe a bit about what your interests are in the hobby, and maybe a bit about your YouTube channel as well?
Yeah, sure. So I predominantly have an Instagram profile where I just post the miniatures that I do, but I branched out a wee while ago into doing some YouTube videos just about random things, observations, and the odd time I would tell stories of my days as a Games Workshop employee and some of the rather ridiculous things that would happen. And they're quite fun to tell. Currently, let's see, from the point of view of my hobby, currently I'm running a Black Shields army because they are my favorite in the Heresy, but they don't really have rules, so it gives me the opportunity to play any Legion I want, but just with the Black Shields in preparation for, when they inevitably get their book.
Indeed, yes, and then some people say Black Shields are peak Horus Heresy, don't they? Because it's such a characterful army to build, and also they have a quite prominent part in certain parts of the story, don't they? And one thing that I always think I'm fairly well read, but I think you're even more well read in the universe of Warhammer 40,000, in particular the novels, and you introduced me to the Black Shields audio drama series. So I just forget, what was it? The False War,
the Red Thief, and the Broken Chain. Yes, the three audio dramas done by Josh Reynolds about the Black Shield, Endred Har, and his Fangs of the Emperor warband.
Yes. And that's a fantastic series of audio dramas. Are quite short. So it's probably about 3.5 hours, maybe 4 hours in total. But I don't think the stories are in print, are they? It's only the audio drama.
Yes, no, they're one of the very few, actually, of the audios that never got a full print variant. The Garrows got it, and some of the other audio dramas got it when they were put into the anthologies. But by the time the third audio of the Broken Chain, the Endred Har one, by the time it had came out, they had started the preamble for the Siege. So, as you've obviously seen, since they did the Siege, there has been no Heresy anthologies. For lack of a better term, it finished with the Buried Dagger. So they haven't even compiled them, I think, into sort of an ebook variant. That being said, Josh Reynolds is no longer working for Black Library, so whether or not they want to go back and deal with that or just keep them as audio dramas, I suppose, is their decision. But they're quite good as audio dramas regardless.
I think so. I really enjoyed all three of them, and it gave me an insight into some of the units of the Heresy. So it adds more flavour to the background to the Black Shields, particularly in Book 6, Retribution, and also of some of the units. So, for example, the Ordinatus Olator. If you're a fan of that Mechanicum monstrosity, this is a great tale to listen to. And also the Legion Mastodons Transporter. And I suppose as well, MKIII Armour, because there are a number of members of Endred's force who are equipped such, and it's MKIII Armour that we thought we might have a little discussion about today and share this with our viewers, because what date is it today? It's the 1st of September, isn't it? 2023.
Yeah.
And earlier this week at the NovaOpen 2023, Games Workshop revealed a number of new products upcoming, and there were several for the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness game. And of course, we were both very excited for this, weren't we?
Yeah.
Probably a bit nervous as well, as we always are with these reveals, because sometimes they've hyped them up way more than what was actually delivered. But I think on this occasion, the actual reveals were very satisfying in the form of, so we had the Demon Primarch Fulgrim Ascended, which is a absolutely magnificently
fantastic model.
A crazy piece of Forge World sculpting there. So we get Fulgrim, the Snack Man, and then I think the other big thing, wasn't it, was the Space Marine Battle Group. This is a box set which is going to be a brand new plastic radio dreadnought, so the Space Marine Long Range Fire Support dreadnought, a Land Raider Proteus stroke carrier, so that was released last year as part of the first wave of Age of Darkness releases. And in addition to that, the big ticket item is, well, certainly for a lot of people, and certainly us, I think, is the new Mark III Space Marine Tactical Squad kit. So this is Mark III Iron Armour. So that was revealed. What were your initial thoughts on that?
I was glad to see any new armour, because obviously since 2.0 has been released, it's been very tank heavy. Apart from the initial run we got with the Mark VIs and their subsequent upgrades for heavy and special weapons, it sort of peaked at that point. Especially for the concept that I run specifically, when it comes to the Black Shields, their whole shtick is that they have limited supplies and limited armor. So while I was quite chuffed to see we got the Contemptor, the Leviathan, the Predators, the Spartan, the Proteus, and everything else under the sun, Sakarans, and they don't have a lot of those.
Yes, it's almost like the releases of last year were almost like the antithesis of the Black Shield's necessity of how they have to operate. Not to say that they don't have tanks and armor, because they do, but
it's predominantly not a lot of it, because their whole thing is they steal what they can, or they raid, or they try to get what they can. If you look at the example of Endrid in those audio dramas, they reference how when he was trying to steal the 3 Ordinatus on Zana, a lot of his men barely had a full clip of bolt rounds.
That's right.
And they had a couple of Mastodons that they brought with them. But we know from the fact that he boarded the Cicatrix Tyrannus and killed the commander Raxor Karadin, they're actually stolen Sons of Horus equipment. So he probably didn't have those before they raided that ship.
Yeah.
They never really mention he has Predators or any kind of armor like that. He doesn't even have dreadnoughts.
No.
He has about, I think they mention in one of the books, he has between 50 and 150 warriors, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, as we were saying about the tanks, when they released all those armor pieces, it was great to see, but I personally was just waiting for infantry. And hopefully, either if it wasn't a variation in armor, at least different variations in units. So command squad, destroyers, assault squad, breachers, anything. Even if it was in Mark VI, having the kits would give me the opportunity to do a lot of kit bashing. And I was really looking forward to it. But obviously, as the year went on, we didn't get any of that. But now, finally, we've got the Mark III.
Yes, and I think you've touched on how a lot of people sort of felt about last year's releases, and I suppose we need to keep a bit of perspective as well, because on the one hand it was almost like a deluge of tanks. Games Workshop has never released so many plastic tank kits in such a short frame of time as they did last year. It was extraordinary. It was a unique moment in the history of the company. They probably released as many tank kits last year as they might have done in the preceding 20 years. Plastic ones. So, obviously for fans of armoured warfare and people who just want to add one, this was good because it replaced the Forge World models, which are obviously expensive, and, let's be honest, the modelling is harder, particularly on the tanks. So that was a good thing. But, I agree, it got very vehicle-centric, and I think people had had enough. As we got into Christmas, people had had enough of the vehicles and they were ready for some infantry.
Yeah,
So
I mean, anything else at that point in time probably would have been very good, because yes, as you say, anybody who's doing an armored company, anybody who's doing a dreadnought detachment is basically, jumping for joy when they saw everything they got. And fair play to them. If you're going to do an Iron Hands detachment of nothing but the dreadnoughts, or you're going to have an armored company from the Iron Warriors or whatever other legion that specializes, let's not forget we got the Scimitar. So anybody who's doing White Scars is basically laughing. But when it came to myself and maybe other people who prefer an infantry heavy army, because some thematic legions would work with that. For example, we know the Death Guard, the Iron Warriors, those kind of legions would go very infantry heavy at times.
Sons of Horus as well.
Oh yeah, with their whole spear tip and drop pod assault decapitation strike thing they do. Yeah.
So let's not take anything away from the Mark VI kit, which I'm personally a big fan of as a rogue trader veteran. So I'm that old. I was very pleased to see the return, and they adopted a new approach with how they set these products up. Insofar as we had a single sprue which had 5 warriors on it armed with bolt guns. Then there was an additional sprue which had, let's say, the command upgrades and melee weapons. So things like the Vexilla, the Vox, and a few more heads, and melter bombs, things like that. And then, in addition to that, weapon packs were released. So there was one set which had 10 of each of 6 special support weapons. So flamers, Volkite collivers and chargers, plasma guns, etc. And then 3 other kits which dealt with the heavy weapons. So missile launchers, heavy bolters, las cannons, etc. And these weapon kits integrated with the tactical squad kit, and it allowed you to, build troops for certainly 3 of the core Legion squad. So the tactical squad, the tactical support squad, and the heavy support squad. And arguably, there was enough bits in there to do veterans. And if you're prepared to do a bit of converting, you can get into Seekers and Recons. But it was all Mark VI, and the Heresy, one of the things that defines it is the armor marks of the Space Marines. It has no effect on gameplay outside of the turn, mate. There's no effect on gameplay, but boy, do people love their armor marks on Space Marines. And
it's just a way to make them unique. It's one of the nice things about it is that, for some people like to have a squad of entirely the same mark, whereas some people like to have a squad of just every mark under the sun. A Mark II, a Mark III, a couple of 4s, a 5, a 6. And it's nice to have that because it's a wee bit of painting variety as well.
Yeah.
For the people who like to create characters, they can think about what kind of armor marks, what suits this, that, and the other. And, I don't care what anybody says. Eventually, it gets quite dull painting the same mark of armor again and again and again. So at least if you've got a 3 and a 6, you've got the little bits of banding, or if you've got the 5, you've got the bonding studs. On the 4, you've got, the sort of knee pads and things. There's a lot of things you can do there with each mark that gives it its rather unique painting style.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. It, as you say, all the Marine armour marks are very different, and it's perhaps you can observe there's a bit of the historical roots of 40k influence here, because the Space Marine armour marks, or the armour marks of legions, come straight out of ancient Rome. And if you look at the legions, the Roman legions throughout their history, not only did they change in terms of how they were made up, but their armour changed as time went on and the technology evolved. And that concept was very cleverly crafted into 40k. It's an absolutely key part of the Heresy. So after much waiting, this week we've got the first good look at these new models. And I suppose this brings us to the core of what we want to talk about today, which is just our thoughts and observations on the new Mark III kit, because it is something new. It's a re-imaging of an existing and well-established design concept, although, that concept is not a fixed thing and it has changed over its lifespan. Maybe sort of think about that a bit and also reflect on perhaps the pros and cons of these new models compared to the plastic ranges that had previously been available for the Heresy, say in the form of the Mark IV Marines from Calth, and in particular the plastic Mark III Marines from the Burning of Prospero box, which was, of course, that was very popular and well received within the community, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. When that came out, that it sort of reinforced the idea that the Heresy was expanding from just being a Forge World only army or a game to something that may be a bit more mainstream. And everybody loves having a plastic instead of a resin. Unlike yourself, who I know does enjoy a bit of resin now and again with the amount of tutorials and things you do, I prefer plastic. It's easier to work with. It's easier to convert. You don't have to worry about any washing, cleaning, mold slips, or especially depending on the era of when you were doing your Forge World, they're either really, really good or rough,
Yeah, with underline on the rough. Yeah, you don't have, with plastic models, you don't have to worry about things like air bubbles. It's not a thing. And yeah, absolutely, plastic models way more accessible for a whole host of reasons to most hobbyists. They're more affordable. They're consistent. The quality is dependable, and they're easy to work with in the main, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
So now we've had a good look, haven't we, at the new Mark III miniatures, certainly what that was shared at the NovaOpen reveal and the accompanying articles on Warhammer Community. Quite an interesting new take on the Mark III Marine. What were your first impressions of the Mark IIIs when they were revealed? Because you stayed up, didn't you?
I did indeed, yes. Thankfully, I didn't have work the next day, so I thought to myself, you know what, I'll stay up for the crack. We already sort of knew that these were coming because in the last preview, they showed off the teaser picture, which ended up becoming the cover art for the box for this new battle group. And I remember looking at that picture going, there's slight changes to the Mark III. And while looking at it with my colleague Gav, who is also in the sort of the Legion of Two thing we do, we sort of took the concept apart really and looked at it and went, okay, there seems to be small, subtle changes that, which is either due to the plastic mold or maybe they've just decided to add a new take on the concept. And overall, I actually thought they were quite nice. There's a few small things. We had a debate, shall we say, he and I, where he was looking at them going, he was quite chuffed, but at the same time, he was a bit annoyed.
Right.
And after getting down to the core argument, because he was looking at it going, he was saying to me, they've got strange quirks in this armor. They've got circular sections on the elbows and knees, and there's no sort of neck joint of reinforced metal. The backpack looks a bit different. The heads look smaller. Turns out in the end, what he was really complaining about was the fact he'd already painted 40 of the original Mark III Death Guard. And because a bit like me, he likes the new scale. And it was looking a bit like little and large when he was fighting against my Mark VI Black Shields, which at that point I was playing as a World Eater sort of subfaction. He was happy and livid because he just knew he would have basically all those guys would just be shelved, and these new Mark IIIs would take their place.
Yeah.
So his hang-ups, while he would consider them legitimate, it just boiled down to, oh no, I've got to paint more of these now.
Okay, so he was conflicted then. He liked the look of the new miniatures, but there was also part of him that was, I've got a vision of what my arm is going to be like. I want sort of like a continuity of design. Either I want the previous system, let's call it that, as we saw with all the plastic Space Marines that have come before, new Age of Darkness Mark VIs, or he wants them in the new style, but not a mixture.
Yeah, that seems to be the way he wants the army to work. And, it's his army, it's his interpretation, fair play to him. If that's the way he wants to run, that's fair enough. I obviously have a different take where I want a mishmash of everybody because my idea is they've all took stolen and armor things. So, but he's trying to stay very as close to the lore as he likes it at a certain era. So in his mind, the Death Guard have lots of 3s and 2s, and I think the only 6s he's actually running are guys who are inducti.
Right.
And he's going for the idea that the veteran suits, the heavier plate, aren't given to these pups who have been force-fed into the Legion, and they get the armor that the Death Guard maybe don't like as much, potentially because it's not as thick as they like it, or they have another hang-up in his interpretation.
Yeah.
So he's like, you know what, we'll give it to the inducti, and if they survive, maybe we'll give them the Mark III of a corpse that maybe didn't survive eventually. So, that let's just say he'll be looking forward to Mark IIs if and when they ever drop. Because, the Mark II and the Mark III are very aligned. So I think his Death Guard will look fantastic when they're like that,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and as Heresy fans, who isn't excited and full of anticipation for a re-imaged Mark II kit? I have no idea what I'll use them for as an army yet, but I'm very excited for them to do it. And I think one of the interesting things with Mark III, and perhaps we'll touch on this later, is it's a little window into what a new Mark II might look like as well, isn't it? It's not just Mark III, because Mark III is a modified Mark II. So it's quite interesting from that point of view, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, no, definitely.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said there about the continuity of the armor, because that is, for a lot of people, that's really important, isn't it? And with the introduction of the new Mark VI Marines and now the Mark IIIs, which they're a little bit taller, not a lot, and they're not taller than every Space Marine. So I've got some resin Marines, standard power armor Marines, resin Marines that are taller than my Mark VI, some of my Mark VIs. So it's not entirely clear cut, but on average they're taller. And that's something to consider. And it's something, so I'm working on Sons of Horus armies, well know. And a big part of it is I was like a child at Christmas with all the new Mark VIs. I've been looking forward to these for like 35 years I waited for these. And, I'm absolutely delighted with them. But at the same time, I wanted not just Mark VIs, I wanted some of the characterful units that really define the Sons of Horus, so the Justarian Terminators and the Reavers. I had to then sort of like weigh up, well, there is a bit of a scale thing to consider here, so what do I do? So with the Terminators, with the Justarian, I just put a 0.5 millimeter plastic card sole on each foot, just to give them a little lift. And I found that just works to keep them looking a bit taller than the Mark VIs. When I come to the Reavers, now the Reavers I think there's probably a bigger challenge there for scale. So I need to think again about how I'm going to do that. Maybe I'm going to use a bit of base terrain just to, again, lift them up a bit so they don't look small next to the Mark VIs. But I can see for some people, they might not want to do that. And it's got to be all one of one set or one of the other. And, fair enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the end, it's everybody's interpretation of how they want to do it. If they want it a certain way, that's fair enough. There's no one apart from yourself that can really tell you that's not how it's meant to be. Within reason. For example, Primaris in 30k doesn't really make much sense. But if it's coming to just your interpretation of, oh, my guys have all this suit of armor, or they've got everything under the sun, or I prefer only this certain suit, it's your hobby. You decide whatever way you want, really. But when it came to the Mark IIIs, what was your opinion on it?
And on that just point that you made there, something that was important one, and people should do what they want to do, and not let other people tell them what isn't right with this as well. Because at the end of the day, it is a hobby, and you're doing it for yourself, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, you don't really do it for anyone else other than yourself. You paint the models because you want to. You paint and play because you feel like it.
Yeah.
You're not doing it else because someone else told you. Maybe that was what it was back in the day when you got into it because your mate was into it and you wanted to play with them. But, if you stuck on it for this amount of time and you're as a veteran like yourself, shall we say, or someone who's did the workshop thing twice.
Like yourself,
Yeah, you do it because you want to.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely, yeah. So just now to return to your point, so I went off on a bit of a tangent then. And so, what was my initial impressions of the new Mark IIIs? I tried to describe it, how the image imprinted into my mind, and see if it makes sense. So when I look at a model, I tend to take in what I might call its overall impact first. Yeah?
Okay.
So I will look at a model and I'll form an opinion of it based on its general sort of aspect. So, for example, the first time I ever saw a picture of a Warlord Titan, immediately I thought scale enormous, bulky, powerful, just a towering presence. I looked at it, and before I sort of got into the details of like how it's been designed or anything like that, I formed that opinion in my mind of it. And that's how I sort of see models to start with. So with the Mark IIIs, when I saw them, I felt visually menacing.
They definitely look a lot more chunkier and threatening.
Yeah.
I mean,
threatening.
The armor is considered to be one of the most strikingly imposing suits, because it is basically just a giant brick.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Bulk was the next thing. Brutality was another initial impression. And the brutality was born out of, I think, the look of the helmets. They look intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
And the look of the bolters. The bolters look really savage, I think.
They've got a fair amount of chunkiness to them as well, don't they? Compared to the original concept of that bolt gun, where it was a bit thinner and longer almost, This one it's slightly more compressed a wee bit, but it's a very chunky kit, The detail as well is lovely. The detail on the individual bolt shells in the magazine is really nice.
Yeah, and those bolts look very hefty, don't they? I think I think the designers there were actually acknowledging a little bit of lore background that was in the first two Black books, so Betrayal and Massacre. And in that, do you remember there was a page that had the panoply of war? And it was like a line drawing of some.
Yes, it was on a red background, and it gave a breakdown of like grenades and knives and everything a generic legionary would carry.
Exactly, yes. And there was, so the first one, if I recall correctly, in Betrayal, was a Mark II Marine. It had all the weapons, not all the weapons, no, but a number of the key weapons that they had, as well as a line drawing of the suit. And one of the weapons was a Phobos bolter, and it actually stated the caliber as 0.7 inch. So quite amusing thing that, in the grim darkness of the far future, we still have imperial measures. But anyway, in the next book, I think I got this right, Massacre, they had like the mid to late Great Crusade panoply, which was the Mark IV Marine. And the Mark IV Marine had the Tigris pattern bolter. And again, so I remember they'd said it was 0.6 inch caliber. So it was implying it was perhaps a refined lower caliber, but, maybe a bit more sophisticated, higher ammo capacity type approach to the Phobos. And I think with the new Mark IIIs, I do believe they're playing a bit of lip service to this idea that the Phobos bolters were like a weapon of a bit more of a more brutal, less sophisticated Legion approach to warfare. So I like that about it as well. I do like the look of those bolters. Because the new Mark IIIs, they look so big, the bolters look a bit smaller, although I don't think they are. And it's an interesting contrast and it's something that they started doing with the Mark VIs as well there. I think they're kind of just gently descaling the weapons a bit so they don't look quite so huge. Shift to slightly more realistic proportions, if I can dare say that. And I'm not going to say true scale. Whoops, I just said it.
Yeah. If you take the Mark IIIs as an example of them attempting to bring sort of correct proportions into the upscaled miniatures we now have, the heads are the prime example, because I'll use the term loosely, original Mark III heads were always chunky, like massive. It's almost like you could wear a Mark IV helmet and put a Mark III helmet over your helmet, and that's how they got the size of it. Whereas in this iteration, they've scaled them down quite a bit. I would dare say that they would probably be the same size, maybe slightly bigger because it's a reinforced plate. But if you took the Mark II helmet that we get in the vehicle upgrade sprue, and it seems quite small when compared to, say, the Mark VI new head that we have, or even the 4 and the 3 from the previous plastics.
Yeah.
It seemed quite small compared to them, but I would say this one is obviously probably a dead ringer for it, if not slightly bigger. And in a way it should be, because the Mark III helmet is basically the Mark II helmet with a improved front visor.
Yeah.
So
this idea that the armor, like the whole of the front of Mark III, is all reinforced to make it more resistant to damage, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, even looking at you were saying earlier on about the idea of what we could see when it comes to the Mark IIs. You can actually already see small bits of it, though we don't have a 360 image of the new Mark IIIs. All we've got is those front stills from the NovaOpen.
Yeah.
You can already see that if you look at the Mark II torso we get in the vehicle upgrade sprue, he has the same sort of belt and the same circular thing holding the skull. So,
okay.
Yeah. So obviously what the creator has probably thought to himself is he's looked at the Mark II that they've done and went, okay, these guys, for lack of a better term, all they did with the Mark II was weld more metal onto the front, to make it a bit more durable for the boarding actions. So that's basically it. If you could, for example, take the front plate off the Mark III Marine, you'd probably see the Mark II underneath.
Yeah.
If it had that function, for example, so we sort of know what they're going to look like.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, and no, I think you're entirely right there. So that Tank Commander in Mark II, I think it's a little Easter egg in a future kit where we're going to get a Mark II tactical squad.
I think everybody has been hoping for that for quite some time. I mean, when it first came out, yeah, I think I'm glad we got the Mark IIIs. They look great, but I have to admit, I'm a sucker for 2 and 5. So if it had been 2, I don't think everybody would have been so shocked. I think everybody would have been like, we've been calling it for like a year.
Yeah.
But it still hasn't arrived yet.
No, they've gone with the 3. I have no idea what drives the decisions. Well, I understand why they did the 6s. I don't know why they did the 3s a second.
Well, technically, it's classed as according to the that 12-month timeline, they're classing this basically as an armor upgrade. So it's obviously just a way of cleaning house. I would assume, that it's a way of cleaning house because they've probably looked at it and went, we have the 6s and we have an increased scale for Heresy.
Yeah.
While we can sell the 4s and the 3s, they're scaled incorrectly. They're for technically a separate game system, a different game system. So, we'll just release the Mark IIIs and hopefully eventually maybe this time next year, or hopefully this time next year, the quicker they get them out, the better. But, maybe by this time next year, we'll see the preview for the Mark IVs.
Yeah, I see what you're thinking there. Yeah,
so they'll armor upgrade. Hopefully they'd armor upgrade 1 a year. Yeah. And then if we're really lucky, they may do the same with the Tartaros and the Cataphracti. Because I would hope that they would be the same scale as the current 10th edition Indomitus.
And those, I suppose that's a good point.
Because the Terminator needs to be massive.
Yeah. I wonder if they will do that. Because the 10th edition Indomitus Terminators, I think those have been very well received as an update on the classic Terminator design, haven't they?
Yeah.
A bit like
a bit like the Mark IIIs in that regard. Small tweaks in the armor design, small things to make them look slightly different, but they've kept the overall format.
Yeah,
and they went down a storm.
Yeah. I mean, even I picked up some of those, and I just to have a bit of fun with doing some conversions. But I was dead impressed with those. When you say the design, so did they do some little tweaks here and there with those? So I've not actually done that yet. Although I've got some of the original versions of the Jez Goodwin Indomitus Terminators that were released in the Terminator Squad box way back. £9.99 for 8 models. That was. I've not done a really close side-by-side comparison with the new ones. So have you noticed that there are a few changes here and there with them?
Yeah, there's small little tweaks. An example being the mouth grill of the Terminator has sort of this reinforced section around the the sort of metallic grills, the sort of circular pieces. That is sort of banded over a wee bit more than what it used to be. Another example would be the Power Fist. The Power Fist has you would almost describe it as, instead of it just being the power fist, and then the top and the bottom of the fist. It's almost like the top has a reinforced armor plate that's
Yes, it
very
does,
much
doesn't it?
chunkier, and it almost goes to the elbow. That's
Yeah.
obviously different to the original plastics we had from, well, they were around for years.
Oh,
You
those
know,
are very long in the tooth, weren't they? That's a good point. Yeah, because that when you build that kit, that external armor plate you're talking about is a separate component, and
it is, yes.
it literally feels like you're layering the armor on. Whereas before, yeah, it was much more the armor plate was much more constrained or around the power fist or power glove. There's an old term. Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, and it goes to show how they do change and just adapt these designs and introduce little adjustments as the time goes on. And I think that's probably true of Games Workshop models throughout time, hasn't it? When they do an update a model, they don't just literally redo it.
They always do small tweaks. Yeah, I mean, I've got another good example for you. Do you remember when the Black Templars got their plastic run in 4th or 5th edition of 40k?
Vaguely, yeah. I do remember playing a Black Templars army at very memorable game at Warhammer World once. Yeah.
Well, they did. That was the first time that a plastic Mark IV helmet was made.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at, I still have some of them because it was obviously still in the Templar upgrade sprue that existed until Primaris came into existence, and then obviously that was discontinued because the Templars got a full refresh. But when you look at the sort of snout of that Mark IV compared to the current Mark IV that we have, it almost looks like a Sauron pattern faceplate. It's massive. You know, it is a really chunky mouth grill like snout thing they have there at the front. And obviously, as time has went on, they've learned from that and went, okay, when we're doing the Heresy / Legion Mark IVs from Forge, they refined it, narrowed it down a wee bit, made it a bit smaller, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's a great factor, that. That just shows your in-depth knowledge, doesn't it? Because I suppose prior to that, the last Mark IV models would have been one of those oddball metal ones they did, either when they, sort of going back to 1990, when they first conceived the idea of the Space Marine armor mark, they did one of each. And then they did another set, which was like the Armor Through the Ages models. I think they only went out of production fairly recently, didn't they?
I think so, yeah. I think they were originally in metal, and then they got the Finecast treatment, which I'm sure everybody loved.
Yeah.
And I think then they just got discontinued. But I think they're one of the sets that they bring back. Don't they do a thing once a year where they do this sort of made to order?
They did, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Bring a load of well, I'll use the term Finecast because that's what it is currently. But they always bring these old Finecast things back, like the Fourth Ed chaplains, you know, the 3 different variants, the old librarians, the Armor Through the Ages, the Legion of the Damned. They'll always bring those back. Usually once a year, you'll get a Space Marine made to order run, and they're usually included in that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yes, and that was a few months ago. They did the Armor Through the Ages made to order. Yeah. So, but what you're saying there, again, it's an example of how the designs do change with time. And I guess that's one advantage we've got, perhaps, of being a bit older, particularly me, in that through our lived experience, we've seen how these models have changed so much over the years. So, certainly in my mind's eye is, a Space Marine in any given mark of armor, there's a definite look to it. But when you get into the fine details, there's been a lot of variations. Yeah.
Sometimes they're small and subtle. Sometimes they're a bit more in your face, but there's usually small tweaks.
Yeah. So, which brings us nicely back to the new Mark III. So, what are we thinking? Of the new Mark IIIs, are we thinking small and subtle or in-your-face changes?
I would say that it's a in-your-face change, but for the better. Because you may as well say, for anybody who is maybe being a bit more attentive to it, you could tell that when we got Fafnir Ran, his Mark III was actually quite different. But you couldn't tell if it was because it was some sort of artifice armor or if it was the better quality plastic molds.
Yeah.
But then when we got Varen Ashradon, his legs, for example, if you look at the back of his legs, they were virtually identical to Fafnir Ran.
They are, yes. And just to say this, I'm actually looking at my example of Varen.
Yeah. So that obviously tells you that, there's going to be a tweak. And when you do look, for example, at the front of the new Mark IIIs, they are very reminiscent of Fafnir. The plates are a lot smoother. The ridging is a bit more pronounced on the new Mark IIIs. The circular bits on the knee joints. Which
That's
I will
new,
admit, not particularly that much a fan of. The new sort of. I didn't really think they needed the balls, those sort of circular joints on the knees, because obviously the concept of the knee pad is it's just a Mark II hoop that they didn't really reinforce, because the reinforcement was on the top of the leg and the bottom of the leg, and there was maybe there was a reinforced sort of circular plate of armor put on top of the Mark II one. But that sort of is that way. But you could argue, while it may not be my forte, this is a different iteration. And for all we know, when they do the Mark IIs, they may create a new iteration of how their legs look.
Yeah.
And in the sense of continuity, the 2 and the 3 will match the new generation.
Yeah.
But the 2 and the 3 won't match what people would consider the older generation.
Yeah. And I suppose, and I guess by the older generation, I mean, shall we explore exactly what people might, what is the older generation of Mark III Marines? I mean, for a lot of people, their view of what a Mark III Space Marine is has been shaped by Forge World's interpretation of the design, which dates back to when they did the Badab Wars range, I believe.
Yeah. I would say yes. If we had to use iteration numbers, shall we say, that's probably the second interpretation of the Mark III. The first interpretation being the old metal ones you would get many moons ago. So the resin was like the third iteration, but even it got slightly revised with the difference between the Legion Mark III and the generic Mark III set that they did for Badab.
Yeah, of course,
because there was 2 different sets of 5-man teams.
Yeah, there were, I think every armor mark Forge World did a kit for, didn't they? Which was kind of Badab era, let's call it that for want of a better term. Badab stroke Imperial Armor era. And then they revisited those models when the Heresy came along and did a Legion take, didn't they?
Yeah, and even they had subtle changes. If we take the Mark III as a prime example, if I remember correctly, now I may be slightly wrong on this because it might have been the sort of a variant set, but I could have swore that the Legion Mark III was the first time we saw a Mark III helmet that didn't have the mouth grill ridges. It was just a flat plate.
Oh, okay. Right.
Although that might have been, I might be wrong. It could have either been those or the Rapier upgrade kit, or potentially even the, not the Destroyers. What was the other unit they did in Mark III? But it was the first time.
The Despoilers.
Yes, that's the one. But either way, that was the first time we saw even that small variation. The idea that it doesn't have these 3 sort of mouth grills. Obviously, that's what the Vox is meant to talk through. It's just a reinforced flat plate with no marks on each side. Yeah. And when obviously we got to the plastic iteration, some of the suits have a flat on one side or a couple of dots to show where the Vox would speak, or a couple of lines. But neither of them actually have, none of the plastics actually have the sort of flat on both sides. That was sort of kept as a Forge World only type thing,
Yes, that's true,
Looking at the, just having a wee quick look here on the Nova, or the Warhammer community site, they've actually got one of them in the set. If you look at some of the heads, for example, there's one there that has no little grills. There's one that has the grills on the left, but it's flat on the right. Yeah. And then there's one that has it basically reversed, where it's the grills on the left, but it's flat on the right. So they're trying, I think, to sort of hybridize and, sort of add everything together, really.
Yeah. And I also think part of what they're doing is, this is where perhaps Games Workshop miniatures differ from Forge World a bit in terms of general design philosophy. Games Workshop miniatures, where you've got models where you've got a lot of the same type of unit, they like to introduce little variations, which I think is basically for painting interest. And I think it's kind of like part of their brand design philosophy. The variations around the grill positions, I think it's part of that. And also, though, within that, they've done something that I quite like. They've taken essentially what was the breacher design, where it was a completely flat face plate with no Vox grill, no air filter grill. And we've got some designs like that in this new kit. So I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, I mean, if we're lucky enough one day where they decide to release, I doubt they would release a breacher unit. We'd probably end up getting an upgrade sprue. But with that idea, that we already have the sort of Vox grills removed for some of the helmets. If you wanted sort of the classic look of the breachers, you would save up a couple of those heads and put them in that unit.
Yeah, buy the box set, and if it's like the Mark 6s, you'll get more helmets than you need.
Yeah. Because you'll always get, what is it? You get 6 helmets per 5 men, because one of the helmets has to be the one that has the plume.
Correct.
And obviously, if you don't have a sergeant for every 5 man. If you take it in a 10 or a 20-man unit, you've basically got a couple of heads spare.
Mm-hmm. That's right, Yeah, so hopefully we'll see. I think this new Mark III kit will do the same thing. And you could save up your smooth face ones for future breaches. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Just going back to the knees and the design. So the knee is definitely a new take.
Yeah, they've sort of made it more squarish than just a circular plate. It used to just be essentially a full circular plate, but now it's got a bit of a... It's obviously circular at the top and it's semicircular at the sides, but it has more of a square look.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing to say, a square circle, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, there's probably, and someone will probably write this in the comment, there's probably a proper name for a square which has got rounded off corners. We were looking at this earlier and talking about it, weren't we, before we did the podcast. And the original metal miniatures and the Forge World resin ones took a very literal reading on John Blanche's original art concepts so this is from White Dwarf 129, which was published in 1990, and that's where the visual origins of Space Marine armor comes from, apart from Mark VI.
Yeah.
But it's a weird design because it's almost like a band that goes around the knee. I would imagine it as being a semi or actually quite flexible material, because otherwise how would it work? But when I look at this new design, I think they've thought much more about how the articulation would really work, and they've tried to make something that I think feels more like it could work as a suit of armor. But they've still stuck to the band design at the bit. And if you look at Fafnir Ran or Vera and Ashadora, how do you say the name? Ashuradon.
Yeah.
They've still got the band that runs around the back of the knee, which is still sort of harking back to the original artwork. But it's definitely a departure, and it is a new look, isn't it? Some will like it, others maybe less so.
Yeah. I've actually just taken a look there while we were talking at the 3D image of Fafnir Ran, and they've actually, what they've done is, on his one, he has the identical knee pads with those circular bits at the side.
Yeah.
But instead of the original sort of Mark II, Mark III design, where obviously the knee hoop was like the keystone to the other hoop plates that would connect into it, and then, it was just a thick banding around in the circular bit at the front. In this one, you can actually see that underneath he has bundle fibers exposed at the top and the bottom, and just a thin piece of metal going around it, which obviously for him is that when he would kneel, the character would kneel down.
Yeah.
He actually has the ability to make a proper right angle.
Yeah.
Rather than just, being a bit off slightly.
Yeah, and you've done a better job there of explaining the look of it than I tried to do. It's new. There's a nod to the original concept, isn't there?
Yeah. I've actually just realised on his backpack, he also has a Mark III that has a spike.
Does he?
Yeah, if you look at the 3D image on the GW website, you'll see that his Mark III that hangs off the back of his boarding shield actually has a spike on the head, just like the new Mark IIIs. That was something I didn't actually realize. So, that sort of idea that all the Mark IIIs would now carry that must have been in the pipeline for some time.
I'm looking now, and you're right. Blimey. So they've decided that the helmet spike is a general thing. A great spot there, Jay. The knee bit is a definite development of design, new tape. However, the segmented armour, I think that's a bit different again, though, isn't it? Because that's different to Forge World's design.
Yeah, the sort of Forge World design kept the concept of the sort of hooped plates that rest on top of each other. So you had the bottom hoop, you put the top one on, and then you put the top one on, and they sort of all semi-connect by the lower one going into the upper one.
So like an overlapping design.
Yeah, and the plastic Mark IIIs and the resin Mark IIIs kept that idea that those hoops were still there, but they just, welded more metal to the front. The new design has went for the idea that they're all the same size. And there's just, the hoops are still there, but instead of them overlapping, they just rest on top of each other. And then they've got these new sort of exposed fiber bundles, which, though the original, or I hate to use the term original, but the earlier Mark IIIs did have it. These ones are a bit more pronounced.
Yeah.
I won't say they're sticking out, but they definitely seem wider and chunkier compared to the sort of plastic resin concepts of the exposed fiber bundles.
Yeah, no, I'd agree there. They've gone for a lower profile cooling cable at the back, haven't they? But on this, I think they've actually gone for a more faithful interpretation on this part of the armour, back to the original art concept, which was basically the same as the new one. They weren't overlapping, and they were side by side, and I seem to remember in the description it said they were flexible. This arrangement of plates gave the armour its flexibility. But in that regard, I think the new ones are a more accurate interpretation of the original art. I mean, this isn't to say one's better than the other, but I guess what I'm saying is the Forge World ones weren't necessarily as accurate as people think. And by that, the Forge World ones were an interpretation in the same way that these new ones were. Because Forge World, they completely threw out the window the original descriptions and the art. The helmets on Mark III was locked to the torso, so it didn't have a movable head. And they quite rightly said, we're not doing that idea, because then it's going to be rubbish, because posing the head on a model adds a lot of character. So did the right thing to boot that one out.
Well, I mean, because if you had that, I mean, one of my main criticisms about the newer iterations of the plastics is it takes a bit more to kit bash them. I did like it a couple of years ago when you could literally take a set of Mark VI plastic from the 40K Tactical Squad, a couple of Mark IIIs, a couple of Mark IVs, and the Mark V torsos from the same Tactical Squad, smash them all together, and every man could be unique, within reason.
Yeah.
Whereas the current concept of multi-part is that the torso and the legs are always fixed.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
You'd have to do a lot of hacking, and sometimes when you want to make something, you don't really want to have to get the saw out, So, if they'd have done that with the head, yes, that would have been extremely restrictive, because looking at some of the early concepts, as you say, of the Mark III, whether it be sort of a tactical line drawing loadout or some sort of scan readout type thing of what the Mark III would look like, some of the versions of it actually have it having tubes going from the neck round to inside the helmet.
Right, okay.
So that probably is from the concept of the fixed helmet.
I see, yeah.
Because with these tubes basically being there, later on I'll send you the picture and you can sort of see it, but that sort of idea is probably, the concept for that when it was designed must have been something in lore where this is for void operations. and that's the air supply.
Yeah.
That the helmet itself isn't sealed like, more modern, more future iterations of the armor.
Yeah.
This is how the Marine breathes,
Yeah. An example, isn't it, of how the design has changed.
Yeah.
But I suppose at the end of the day, it's still the same concept. It was an interesting or an important point that you touched on a bit earlier with perhaps starting to think a bit about pros and cons. The new model layout is, so the previous version was compatible with all the other plastic Marines before it. So there was an enormous range of legs and torsos that could potentially be combined together. Now, some of those wouldn't look right because putting Mark 7 bits on a Mark 3 for Heresy might make a Mark 5, but it might also make something that, like, that doesn't look quite right.
No.
But that's
for Badab, it would have been for Badab, it would have been fantastic because on a slight side tangent, obviously, in the two Badab books, when they did those pages where they would show off, say, like a squad of Astral Claws, every guy's wearing lots of different armor pieces put together. There's a guy, for example, if I remember, he's basically a full Mark III, except for his head and his backpack, which are forged.
Right.
And I recreated that. There's a guy who was one of the Retaliators. He has the Mark 8 errant shoulder pads, but the 7 torso, the 6 legs, the 6 backpack. And, when we had the smaller scale, the scale we had for quite a few years, you could recreate these models with the current plastics, that we had, or before the Mark 3 and the Mark 4 came out in plastic. You would just mix the resin with the plastics,
Yeah. So undoubtedly, that was a great strength of the previous Mark IIIs, wasn't it? That compatibility and flexibility with all the previous Space Marine models that have come along.
Yeah.
What are the pros that kit had? I mean, I think the Mark III tactical squad set, and I'd also kind of bring the Mark IV in that came in Calth originally. They tried to do as much as they could with a small number of sprues. So they kind of covered 90% of several things, but not 100% of everything.
Yeah.
So the Mark III kit was great because you got like a power axe in it. Every warrior had a chainsword. You got a heavy bolter. There was a plasma gun.
There was a thunderhammer.
The old thunderhammer, yeah. So quite, so good options there for your sergeants. But if you wanted to make a Vox operator, then you were stumped.
Yeah.
So I think they tried to make those kits to be most of what a tactical squad would be. And it also did veterans quite well, didn't it?
Yeah.
And the same is probably true of the Calf set. So that was a definite...
The Calf set, if I remember, was slightly different. They went, instead of everybody got a chain blade, if I remember in that one, it was combat knives.
That's right, yeah. Or it was more like a combat blade, like a short sword.
Yeah. It was some size, but it wasn't. Let's just say it wasn't a bayonet for the bolt gun, but it wasn't a full-scale power weapon either.
Yeah, it was. In Heresy 1, the way the Space Marine squads were set up, you could take additional close combat weapons, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Whereas in Heresy 2, they've lent into this idea that the Marines, they all carry bolt pistols, and then they might carry a bayonet, a chain bayonet, or a chain sword, but no longer just a plain blade, let's say. Yeah, so they're definitely... So that was a strength of those, of the previous Mark III kit. They were very versatile. What other pros do you think they had?
The original plastic 3s and 4s. One of its main advantages is that it gave people a cheaper alternative.
Yeah.
I love Heresy. I'm not going to deny it, but I don't really wish to have to remortgage my house to be able to run a 3 to 5k army that has a lot of infantry in it and/or a lot of tanks. So having Calth and Prospero give us the 3s and the 4s, which at that point in time were considered the mainstay of most Heresy, battles.
Yeah.
Especially Kelf and Prosper, those two themselves, they had those predominant armors. So it gave people a cheaper alternative to at least get their troops up and running. Because with those basic kits and a little bit of kit bashing, you could make, within reason, quite a few different kits.
Yeah.
You'd have to maybe hit a bit sight because you only got one plasma gun per squad. But if you hit a bit sight and got 10 plasma guns, you could make a support squad.
Yeah, it could
If
do.
you did the same with heavy bolters, you made
Missile
a heavy weapon teams. You know what I mean? Or the missile launcher, yeah. And that was, I think, personally one of its best advantages. And then for myself, as I say, when you took the Mark V torso, the Mark VI torso, and the Mark VI legs from the tactical squad for 40k, and you moved those in, you had even more options.
Yeah. The 40k tactical squad and Devastator squads, and even assault squad kits, they had a lot of bits that would nicely integrate in. I mean, in all fairness, some of the bits like hands and equipment still integrate nicely with the new Mark 6 and soon to be Mark 3 range, but they came at a time when the price was right.
Yeah. I actually just thought of another one that you could add in as well. Sanguinary Guard. Sanguinary Guard jump packs. The angelic wings were separate, but they were Mark IV jump packs. So when you took those jump packs and you put them, the reason I remember this is because Gav of the Legion of Two has actually done that. He managed to make an assault squad because he took the Mark IV jump packs, he glued them to a couple of the Calth Mark IVs, and then got some of the chain blades, and that was how he made his assault squads.
Right.
Now, yes, everybody was technically grounded, shall we say. None of them had the Mark IVs that we had. None of them had the jump pose legs or the sort of semi-walking legs. A lot of them were very grounded, but his idea for that was just they've landed and they're getting ready before they take off again. Because not every Marine that's an assault Marine always has to have 1 foot in the air, Some of them can be walking or gliding,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They don't always have to be in taking off or landing. That's quite true. Yeah. So again, that leaning into the strengths of the flexibility, and it meant that you could create full plastic squads by dipping into other ranges, other 40k kits that were available as well. So that was a definite plus. But I think what you said there about the cost, I think absolutely. The cost of building resin infantry armors in Heresy was eye-watering.
Doing anything sometimes with Forge World before the price increases that we've had for the past, say, 3 to 4 years, trying to do anything in Forge World is eye-watering. I once decided that I was going to do an Elysian force when the Elysians came out. And let's just say more than one student loan was used. And I still didn't get to a 2K list.
Wow. Yeah, I feel your pain there, having built a large model count but relatively low points value Solar Auxilia force. Armies like that from Forge World, they're beautiful. The models are amazing. They're fun to play, but flipping it, they cost a lot. So absolutely, and because of that, I think the Prospero Mark III kit, Calth Mark IV kit, they're always going to have a special place in people's hearts because of when they came, and I imagine for a lot of people, probably a significant majority, it was the first time they could afford to do a Heresy army.
Everybody has their favorites. It's as simple as that. I mean, on a slight tangent again. I was always a big fan of the original metal Wolfen from the 13th, the Eye of Terror campaign, the first time we had the 13th Black Crusade. Their concept to me, I always thought was brilliant. The idea that they're still wearing the armor they had, but they're bursting out of it. They've got the exposed Wolfen heads and the claws. Maybe one guy's got his arm bare, but he's still wearing his shoulder pad. And, I thought were brilliant. I had like 70 of those guys when I was running an army back. Yeah,
staff discount?
No. Begging. We're going back a while now. So this was begging my parents you know. But eventually I got them. But then obviously when they did the plastics, while I came to understand their choice, they just didn't push any of my buttons, if you know what I mean. I looked at those and went, they're a good scale, there's a lot of design, they've got the exposed arms and they're all obviously rage filled, the claws, and you can see their connector ports on the Marines, the black carapace. But I just missed that original concept, that they're in their armor still, because these guys have been running about for years, so they're keeping what they've got and everything's banded together and bastardized and wrecked.
We all get nostalgia, don't we, for certain armors we have. Absolutely. Feeling nostalgic for when you've been able to collect an army, you knew it was something special to you. Yeah, it's always then a bit different to move on to something new, isn't it?
Yeah.
That can be a bit jarring, can't it?
Mm-hmm. It's even an idea I actually recreated. When I did my first couple of Black Shields, when the Mark 6s came out, I actually got 2 of the plastic Wolfen claws from the current Wolfen set and one of their heads, and actually recreated that idea, but for one of my Black Shields. So this guy is obviously Wolfen in his armor, and his head and his claws are exposed, but that's it. Nothing else has sort of burst out yet. And I, obviously in this idea, he's went Wolfen, but the Black Shields don't care.
Nice. So, but a little tribute model for yourself there.
Yeah.
I like that. No, that's really cool. So I think we've waxed lyrical a bit there about how all the great stuff about the Mark IIIs, and the Mark IVs, Prospero and Calth. But was it all meadows and roses and butterflies, or were there some less edifying aspects to these kits?
Yeah, I would say so. Not everything's perfect. So, I suppose you'd have to bring it down to what you would consider to be the downside. Yeah. For example, I thought the Mark IV kit was lovely, but there was a bit too many of them that had monomolecular bonding studs, because I considered that to be a Mark V thing.
Yeah.
So when I did certain guys, if I was going for the idea that they had a full set of Mark IV, say like a non-Black Shield army, when I did Word Bearers a while ago, if they were in the Mark V, they had the studded Mark IV legs, because that's as close as to Mark V I was getting without hitting Forge.
Yeah.
But if they had the non-studded, and then I'd give them the proper Mark IV torso and head, etc. For me, there was just small things. Not having every sergeant option can always be a bit of a kicker. We got a power sword, we got a power fist, that's excellent. But what happens if you're playing a world eater and you wanted everybody to be run about with an axe?
Yeah. Well,
it's small things,
Yeah. No, but that was not an option with that kit, was it? And going on to Mark IVs, we're going off topic a bit, but those studs used to drive me nuts, and I actually took, not terribly, but when I did my Word Bearers, where I used 40, was it 50 I used in the end? No, 40 of those miniatures, the Calth Marines for my Word Bearers army. For quite a lot, I did take the studs off because I just felt there were too many all the same. And I used it as a way of adding variety to them. About the Mark IIIs, though, I've got a point that applies to that whole range of the Mark IIIs and the Mark IVs.
Yeah.
From Calth and Prospero. But before we get onto that, any sort of unedifying aspects of the Mark IIIs? Because I'm going to say it because the thing that drove me nuts about them was the backpack design. Not the design. Design was fine, but the kit design. Whereby... they came in those two halves, and getting rid of the join line between them was an absolute nuisance. I did not like them for that. That was...
For me, it was legs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, God. The first time I actually got Mark IIIs was... I was given them, but someone thought they were doing me a favour by clipping them out. And I didn't get the instructions. I was told to build them. Because I was working for a workshop at the time, and those legs do not fit other sets. If you've got the crotch and the left leg, and you have to attach the right leg, only certain right legs will fit, And usually it's, A to A, B to B, if we use that
Yeah.
example. Now, if I remember on those kits, they didn't have an A to B little stamp. So I had to spend about an hour trying to figure out what leg suited what. And I'm pretty sure I didn't get all of them right. But they were only for display, so it didn't really bloody matter. But when it came to my own, I made sure that each leg was done one at a time. And from that point on, let's just say when it came to the workshop, nobody clipped anything out for me. And if they did, they at least give me the instructions. Because you wouldn't think to yourself, and the person probably thought, I'm not going to need the instructions because it's only legs. What does it matter? But when it came to those, you did.
You did, yeah. That was quite unforgiving, the design there. And it was a bit like 1980s Rubik's puzzle, trying to figure out what went where. I think even like the new Mark VIs, some of the poses have separate leg elements. I think it's much more intuitive to figure out what goes where.
Yeah, well, they all have, dependent on the leg, they have it's almost like a puzzle piece. They do have an adjoining one. One of them has a little prong that sticks out. Another one has a little square connector.
Yeah.
One of them has a ball socket joint. So it's very hard to mess those ones up, because you'd look at it and go, okay, well, the prong isn't jabbing into the hole here, so it's obviously not, the right one.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, so that was a bit of an unedified aspect of those Mark IIIs.
And you're right about the backpacks, because no matter how many times you got the right A and the right B, and you clipped off the little bit of sprue tab, when you glued them together, they either didn't fit, or you had to really press them hard to make sure that the two vents would actually have the connection, or you'd have to use sprue glue, shall we say, melt
and go back and smooth, go back. Something like Tamiya extra thin to go over and get it all smoothed up. It was a bind. I'm hopeful with the new Mark IIIs that they follow the Mark VIs, which were very well designed from the point of view of cleanup. Firstly, the molds have been machined very well, so the mold lines were pretty thin. And secondly, they put them on edges, so quite often there was no mold line because it was actually running along an armour edge. Some clever design there with those. I appreciated that. So, touch wood, I hope these new Mark IIIs will follow that as well.
Yeah, I would hope so. One thing I would hate to see would be the mold line that runs down the front and the back of the leg. That would be extremely frustrating.
That would upset me. That would.
Yeah, it's kind of a universal thing. Yeah. Most Space Marine kits, the mold line is between the leg to the leg, sort of to the sides.
Yeah.
And you mold line one side, you do the underside, the crotch, you go around, you do the other side. See, when you have to do the sort of the front and the back, and it sometimes can, interfere with nice detail.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the Primaris kits are like that.
Oh,
and that's a bit annoying,
So hopefully these will be good. Like I said, I thought the Mark VIs were very good. I also thought those new Indomitus Terminators, I thought were well executed in terms of mold lines and hiding them.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I've got one more unedifying, or one thing I didn't like so much about the old Mark IIIs. I'm going to throw in the ring.
Go on.
And that was the size of helmets.
You thought they were too chunky?
I thought they were. I thought they were a bit too big.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know quite what happened in translation from the Forge World ones to those, but before we came on this call, I went back and dug out some of my Forge World Mark IIIs.
Yeah.
The heads on those are definitely either a little bit smaller or a little bit slimmer, or the details more finely profiled. They feel smaller compared to the plastic Mark III ones, which I thought were quite big, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point that it put me off the look of them somewhat. Yeah, that's my personal taste, but...
Yeah. I suppose when you're used to one thing for so long, that could be one of the reasons why some people are not a fan of the new Mark III helmets. It's not because of their design. It could be that they're scaled differently.
Yeah.
So it looks like the guy with the shrunken head from Beetlejuice compared to the guy wearing a giant helmet. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground there. It's either it's too small or it's too big.
I hope that once we actually get the mods in our hands, then I think that will make a difference, because photographs lie. And while we've got an idea of what they look like, At the end of the day, it's a photograph. It's a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional object.
Mm-hmm,
and until you actually have that model in your hand, you can't fully appreciate it. So I think there's that, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
There's one other thing with the old range, which I think was a problem with it, and that was the fact that for heavy weapons and special weapons, in the main, people had to buy resin upgrade sets.
Yeah.
And that was an issue that was never addressed. And the consequence of that was that if you wanted a last cannon squad, you had to spend, I don't know what the going rate is these days, but is it 15 quid for 5 weapons? So you got the cost of your tactical marines, that's 50 quid for 20. And then you got another 30 quid on top of that just in heavy weapons for 10.
Yeah.
That's quite a hefty price, isn't it? Without bits box raiding or buying huge numbers, like multiples of 5s and 10s of the sprues, that was always an issue.
Yeah. We've sort of got that right now, but hopefully that will be rectified soon. And I don't mean sorry about the las cannons, despoilers.
Oh, despoilers! Do we dare? Do you think we can? Do you think someone's already starting to furiously type into the comments about despoilers?
Well, we're talking about Mark IIIs, so we won't go off on a tangent. But I will say this: it'll be a lot more efficient for everybody when the plastic assault squad comes out, because once they hit the bit sites, you can buy the arms for your power armor, well, your tactical Mark VIs, and you can make the spoilers, and you don't have to worry about forge. Now, price is an issue, let's be honest. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But for me, it's going back to what I said earlier on, just having to deal with resin. Because while the molding quality is a lot better than it was 15, 10 years ago,
way better.
There's always going to be that one wobbly sword, or that one wobbly thing, and no matter how many times you bend it, it always looks out of shape. At least the plastics hopefully will not have that issue.
They won't. The plastics will be.
You're saying that now. What do you see? We're going to get the first whack of assault marines. They're going to come out. Everything's going to be molded pearly because they've had to speed run them to get them out.
Oh,
and the sword's going to be bent at a 90-degree angle.
Oh, don't jinx it. Don't jinx it, Jay. No, please don't. I have such high hopes for the assault squad. It's got the potential to put right so many little things that aren't quite available in the current plastic range. So, let's hope they do get that good. And ultimately, let's hope they do a plastic upgrade sprue for the Despoiler squad. Because I think with Siege of Cthonia book, a lot of legions have been given really interesting options for Despoiler squad inductee.
Yeah.
And, unless you're a masochist like me who is going to do a squad using at least in part the resin bits and hitting the, obviously shouldering the cost, although you generously have helped out with that with that bit swap we did.
Yeah.
Let's have plastic despoiler bits. I mean, am I... Right, now, remind me.
Yeah.
You may remember better than I did. On this year's roadmap...
I'm looking at it right now. I know what you're going to say. Melee weapons, Spring 24.
In plastic?
Yep. In the plastic section beside Legion Command Squad, it says just the words melee weapons. That has led me to believe that just like the Forge melee weapon upgrade sets they did of the axes, the knives, the swords, the parfis, all of that nonsense, I think we'll just get a melee weapon upgrade sprue. So we'll get chain blades, we'll get, knives, axes, mauls, hammers, two-handed chain axes. That's what I'm hoping for, because what they've done with the special and heavy weapons, it's not that hard to fire out 5 or 10 chain blades, 4 power fists, 2 axes, both left and right-handed.
Yeah,
because they did it in Forge. So that's what I'm hoping for. If that's what the melee weapons is going to be for plastics for Spring 24, that's what I'm hoping for. And that would then obviously just completely negate the Despoiler resin upgrade.
It will do, yeah.
Yeah, so, which will probably end up being discontinued. If they've got a plastic variant, you don't need the resin variant.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of time now, I guess, and then hopefully we will be furnished with all the melee weapons we want in plastic. So that's great news, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think we're now sort of leaning into the last part of our conversation today, which is about pros and cons of new Mark IIIs. I mean, we've touched on bits as we've gone through this, but shall we focus on that a little bit just to the last section of our discussion today?
Okay, yeah. You wanna kick us off then? What would you prefer to go with, a pro or a con first?
Well, I'm going to be like Harry Metcalf on Harry's Garage. I'm going to start with the dislikes.
Okay.
When he reviews a car, he starts with dislikes and then he does the likes. So, start with dislikes. So, the first thing is we are limited to 5 torso, leg, body plan layouts. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that is less variety than you could get out of the current Mark III kits, and the fours are the same. So that is a con, and it does mean that people have to get a bit more inventive to keep the models looking different.
Yeah.
I mean, what I did with my Mark VIs, which has got exactly the same issue.
Yeah.
I've got 60, so I've got 60, 20 tactical support in 2 different weapon types, so they're unique. But I had 40 tactical marines to do, so I had to get them looking different.
Yeah.
So what I did is I bought some of the resin upgrade heads, which I really like, actually. They add character, so I dropped those in, used a variety of helmets that came with the sets, and I also then swapped the arms around from the torsos, and I actually got quite good at it and found that you could put just about every set of arm on every torso.
Yeah, just by clipping away the 2 wee bits that stick out.
Absolutely, yeah. That's how I managed that, and I think I was fairly happy with where I got to with that. But that's definitely a con, I think. Although I will say that also, just to sort of temper that con, that the new posers, so the walking ones, are things that we didn't used to get in the old Mark IIIs and IVs. They were kind of sort of like leg splayed in various. Yeah.
The new Mark VI that has the leg walking in front of the other one is something we never had before. Unlike the guy, it's if I remember correctly, it's the left leg's forward and the right leg's behind it, and it's almost like the 2 feet are perfectly parallel.
Yeah,
one behind the other. Yeah, in a way.
Yeah, and it looks very natural. That's how people walk.
Yeah.
So that's one con. What about you? Have you got any cons?
Yeah, back to my multi-part in name only reference. The inability, without getting out the saw and the knife, to change some of the pieces up. But as I was actually thinking of that con, I had a bit of a brainwave.
Okay, go on. We like brainwaves. Yeah.
Yeah. What if the Mark III and the Mark VIs, their poses are identical, but what happens if the pieces are also identical? I just had the idea that if the joints have the same little connectors and the same legs are missing on each one, you could, for example, if you take the Mark III guy, you could have the Mark III guy with a Mark VI leg. In my Black Shield idea, that just means that opens up a lot of possibilities about stolen pieces and random pieces of armor put together.
Yeah,
doesn't help with the issue with torsos. It doesn't. No. The crux of what I was getting at was torsos. You couldn't have a Mark VI torso on a Mark III legs without a bit of a hack and slash job.
True.
But when it comes to the legs, if the pieces match. And there's not a, say, like exposed area where some fiber bundling or webbing would be. You could have a guy, that guy you mentioned walking forward, both of his legs are separate. The entire left leg is separate and the right leg below the knee is separate. You could swap those with Mark III. And he would have a Mark VI torso, a Mark III top right. Sorry, a Mark VI torso, a Mark VI top right, but then the 3 left and the 3 lower right.
That's a really interesting and insightful observation. That I never even thought about that before.
We'll see when the sprue comes.
Yeah.
Considering they copied the poses, I think they may copy the sprue layout.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you might be onto something there. And if so, that's going to be an interesting way to mix and match the armor, particularly like you say for Black Shields, and thinking to concept art for Black Shields, particularly Book 6. They definitely had some real chimera-like armor designs, as in like a mixture of all sorts of bits.
Yeah.
I bet the power packs will be interchangeable.
I would definitely hope so, because the back torso of the Mark II upgrade on the vehicle has the same long little tab that you could put a Mark 6. Yeah. You could, for all intents and purposes, you could throw the Mark 6 backpack on the guy with the Mark II. And you can do the same with Fafnir and Dominion Xiphon. because that's how I was able to make a Mark VI destroyer. Was I took Dominion Xiphon's backpack, which has the Warhawk style jump pack that we're getting, but it has the destroyer logo on it. I put that on a walking Mark VI and give him a Mark IV bolt pistol from the older kit and a Mark III bolt pistol.
Yeah,
and then the left and the right variant, because I had one from the Forge World kit that I had and one from the plastics, and that's how I got a walking destroyer.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That, and then I suppose the next thing is the bolters as well. Swap the bolters between the two.
Oh yeah, you could have a Mark VI carrying that Mark III style bolt gun, and when we eventually get the 4s and the 2s and the 5s, if they tend to update some of the variants between the Phobos, the Umbra Ferox, and all that kind of stuff, we'll have a lot of variety. And if they all match the poses, and I would assume they will, let's be honest, if they've only done one upgrade set and one heavy weapon set, every pose will have to match so that they can carry any one of these variant weapons. Yeah. So the 2s and the 5s and the 4s will all have the same pose.
So what you've touched on there is, perhaps as the range matures, then it's going to open up wonderful possibilities for swapping legs and arms around to, in effect, create Mark V. Mark V as in Mark V Heresy as opposed to Mark V Pure.
Yeah, the difference between now the production model and the
production. That's
I've stolen somebody's set of legs here because mine were damaged. Yeah,
that's a great shout. That. So we've turned a dislike or a con there into a bit of a pro, I think, but looking ahead as well. Any other cons on these? I'm just thinking with the new ones. One con that I suppose is there, there are changes in the look, and maybe, not everyone's going to like the new look. Personally, I like the new look. I really like what we've done with it, but I think, for some people, probably not. But that's a matter of personal taste. So I don't know if that's really a con.
Yeah. I suppose in the end, it all comes down to, as we were talking about, there are certain small things. It's aesthetics, because they're doing the upgrade sprue from the Sergeant is identical to the Mark VI one. It's basically now just the generic sprue. The Power Fist, the Mark III guy is carrying is just that same one. Now, that's probably now just going to be the generic universal Power Fist. One of the small downsides would be that when they did the Mark III one and the 4 one, you could actually see the different armor plates after you got to the elbow joint. One had the hoop, one had the flat. So a small bit of variety would be nice, but we're getting melee weapon upgrade sets next year. So they're probably in that.
Yeah, that's true.
I suppose one downside I have when it comes to all the sets we currently have is actually the best place to put the bolt pistol.
Okay.
I'm not joking. See, when it comes to the bolt pistol, right? I once decided that it was when I was doing the Sons of Horus concepts I sent you a picture of, right?
Yeah.
I decided, remember, black backpack, black helmet. So they were sprayed separately and painted separately. So when I built the guys and I put the bolt pistols slightly high by mistake, so that when I tried to stick the backpack on, the edge of the bolt pistol was actually stopping. It was in the way. And with these new Mark IIIs, especially, and on the old Mark IIIs, there was a con. Sometimes trying to put the bolt pistols on the left and the right hand side, depending on the shape of the whatever area you were putting it around the circumference of the leg, going to the back plate of the armor that would essentially cover his arse, you would have difficulty attaching it.
Yeah, I always found I always found in my resin Mark IIIs it was difficult putting pistols and ammo pouches on them.
Yeah.
Always a bit of a challenge. I suspect that's probably going to be the case with these new ones, but you make a good point though. I suppose it's about, always test fit. But I found with the Mark VIs that the pistols needed to sit quite low, almost like hanging off the belt. Yeah,
they did. Yeah. I've found that myself now by always dry fitting or blue tacking a backpack on. And then once it's blue tacked on and made sure that, it's not bulging out because of the amount of blue tack, I then dry fit the pistol and see where it can sit.
Yeah.
So it's a small pet peeve, because sometimes when you're putting the model together, you think, slightly up higher, slightly lower, turn it to the side a wee bit or something like that. And you don't sometimes think that small little tweak stops the backpack from going on because the grip of the bolt pistol has basically just taken that space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
and obviously, once you've got that far and you've painted the whole thing, you're looking at it going, right, well, I'm not clipping that off.
Yeah. But I'm gonna chalk that down to being a general observation about Mark IIIs, and indeed doing sub-assembly paint jobs and builds. Always test fit. Sorry, go on.
Well, if you're going to ask me there something before we round up, one thing I wanted to ask before we do round up is...
before we get into the roundup, I was going to say, have we covered off all the pros of the new Mark IIIs?
Oh, okay.
I think we've touched on quite a few as we've gone through this conversation. So, fresh new design, so quite exciting. Mm-hmm. The new proportions, the new poses. They look
bulkier. They're definitely chunkier. Yeah.
Yeah. Giving us a view of where the design on the new Mark II will come. The compatibility with the plastic heavy weapon and special weapon sets, which I think is fantastic.
And hopefully the melees when they come.
Yeah, the melees, and I'm sure that will be the case.
Yeah.
And I think we also touched on that they're modern design, so we're hoping that the cleanup will, follow what we've seen with other recent models, and that it's they've designed to make mold line removal either not necessary or minimal. I suppose another pro with the way it's been released as part of this, so they're calling it the battle group.
Yeah.
And we're going to get 30 new Mark IIIs. We're going to get 1 sprue special weapons. So that will be a total of 30 special weapons. 5 flamers, Volkite, chargers, collivers, melter guns, plasma guns, and flamers? Or did I miss something there? Plasma guns?
Yep, plasma guns, flamers, melta, the 2 Volkites.
Oh, rotor cannons.
Yes, and the rotor cannon. And we are getting 30 guys in the box. So there we go. You could literally fit them out to be 30 special weapon units or 3 10-man special weapon units.
You could do, yeah. So, wow. And it's going to come with new Radio Dreadnought and a Land Raider Proteus stroke carrier.
Yeah.
So I think it will probably be priced in relation to the Age of Darkness set. So I think it should be quite a good value proposition. So if you wanted to get it just for the Mark IIIs, you could buy it and sell the Land Raider and the Dreadnought.
Yeah, no, I would say so. I mean, the Age of Darkness, when it came out, was what, 180?
No, you're asking. It was either 180 or 175.
Yeah.
I just forget now.
I would say that when this one comes out, it's probably going to be between the 120 and the 150 range. And we're probably going to get not as big a saving compared to the original box set, but we're going to get a decent amount of saving because if you take into account it's 20 Marines per box and it's 50 quid for a box of 20 Mark VIs. So it's 50 quid there. So you're technically getting a box and a half. So if you take that down, that's 75 quid for the Marines alone. The special weapons set is what, 25 quid off the top of my head? It could be more, but even if we say 25 quid, that's about 100. And then you've got the Land Raider, which is about 50. Then you've got the radio. So if you're getting the set for 150, you may end up getting something roughly for free. Now, that being said, cheaper the better. I want a ton of them, but let's be realistic. If it's going to be about 120 to 150 quid, you're getting a decent saving and you're potentially getting something in a way for free if you count them at their standard rates.
Yeah, someone I was discussing with this within a group who's fairly knowledgeable on this said they observe that normally these sort of things, vehicle is in effect the free value. At the moment, I'm tending towards the lower end of the price range you set out. So I'm kind of thinking 120, 130 range. And I'm basing that on its value relative to the Age of Darkness box set. I think if they went 150, it'll be too close because you get so much more in Age of Darkness. You get the rule book, you get the templates, you get the game aids, you get a lot more troops. You get 40 Marines, you get 10 Terminators, you get the Praetors. So I don't think they can go too high, but we'll see. I mean, I might be wrong. Yeah, we'll find out.
Well, one last thing then. This is what I was going to say before we went back onto the pros and cons. Was the article said they will be released very soon. What do you think is very soon? Do you think we'll see it? Today's the 1st. Tomorrow is Sunday the 3rd. Will we see it be the This Week in Warhammer this week for next, or do you think we'll see it by the end of September? What is your rough guesstimation of the release date?
My reading of it is they will be on sale within this month, so within September. If the pre-orders don't go up next week, I think it'll be the week after.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you're right. It did say sooner than you might think. So I think part of this as well is because Legions Imperialis has been pushed back because of having to do this reprint on the rulebook, aren't they?
Yeah.
My reading is the Space Marine Battle Group has been pulled forward to fill that slot next week or two. That's my feeling at the moment.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I would be happy to see the This Week in Warhammer post in the next 2 days, have it up for next week's pre-order. But at the same time, my bank account would end up taking an inevitable big hit. So the closer to payday is probably the better for
me. You're getting one. I'm definitely going to get one. So I really like the models.
Yeah.
I like the look of models. I want it for the Mark IIIs and the plastic radio. The plastic Land Raider kit is a fantastic kit. I'm not sure if I need another Land Raider, so I may or may not sell that, but we'll see.
I would probably agree. I have built 3 Spartans and 3 Proteuses, and they're sitting out the back because I don't know what army to put them into. So, yeah, I'd probably do the same. Keep the Deredio. Well, I'm going to get 2 boxes, so keep the 2 Deredios, keep the 60 Marines to put in the World Eaters and the Black Shields, and then, yeah, just flog the Spartans.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot there. We certainly covered everything I had on my mind to talk about on this. Do you think we covered everything you had?
Yeah, no, I think we did, yeah. It was a good discussion. We got everything that we sort of wanted to get out. We had a chat about everything, and yeah, we'll see how well, it goes.
See how it goes, yeah. Hopefully you viewers have enjoyed this discussion. I've certainly enjoyed discussing this with you, Jay, and I always enjoy our chats. And I hope you're all listening. I hope you've enjoyed this as well. As always, interested to hear your thoughts and observations. And obviously, there has been some sort of quite negative discourse around the new Mark III Marines online. And I certainly hope that from how we've held our discussion today, that's not something that we want to be a part of. And, when sharing your thoughts and observations in the comments, do be respectful. And, remember at the end of the day as well, these models are designed by human beings like the rest of us, and it's someone's work, someone's artistic output. If someone came up and told me my work was rubbish, I wouldn't feel too good about that. So,
keep it clean, essentially.
Keep it clean. There you go. That's a short, succinct version. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
As I say, thanks very much for having me on anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's been a real pleasure to have you. And really enjoyed our discussion. And perhaps we should do this again sometime and on another heresy topic of some sort.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Does indeed. So thanks for coming on, Jay. And thank you again, viewers, for listening to this. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.